Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 219th episode, a returning guest is Ash Burgess. You first heard Ash Burgess on 29 previous episodes. For a complete list, check the show notes. Ash Burgess has a dusty degree in religious studies and an appetite for both high and low culture. She strives to celebrate the best of every season with her young children. Follow her on Instagram at Ash Burgess, all one word, and subscribe to her YouTube channel. A quick programming note. In this episode, we discuss the entirety of the HBO series 6 Feet Under, so there will be spoilers throughout. If you haven't seen the show, you really should. And now on to the show.
You gonna do our intro?
I feel so self-conscious doing the intro.
Why?
I don't know. It feels so I like when we're just talking on the podcast. I don't remember that there's an audience usually, but
during the intro, you think about it, hyper think about it, and that's when you're like,
Yes.
I get that.
Are you talking on the phone?
This is why I have to redo the intro section for my YouTube videos sometimes several times. Whereas if things go well, most of it just kind of flows. But it's that part where I'm like, "Hi, it's me." That I'll look back and be like, "Oh no, I have to redo this. This is not gonna work."
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, or I'll misspeak in a way that's not even just an accident that I would normally have, but in a way that's very bizarre and that I would never normally
Right. But welcome back to the Rob Burgess Show, Ash Burgess.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being able to join us.
I somehow was able to make it.
Such a commute.
It was, I did have to travel here, but here I am.
Yeah, and while I was here, she has a phone that we recently discovered.
Oh, the play phone, yes.
The Leapfrog people.
Well, it's one of those emergency toys that I don't really like them to have a lot, but we pulled it out to hopefully keep her occupied.
Mm-hmm. So you may hear some phone sounds.
Yeah.
You had to put it away.
I had to put it away because things got too intense about it, but we've pulled it back out so you have something fun to do while me and Daddy are talking for the podcast.
Yes.
Kevin had a fight.
Yes, all the kids had a fight about the phone before, but now just you are here. The big kids have gone to bed, so you can play happily with that while me and Daddy talk.
Here, can I see it? I think there's a lower volume setting. I hope.
Yeah, I don't know if we thought this through entirely.
I cannot talk to the phone.
Oh, there we go. You got it. That's a little bit quieter, supposedly. Okay.
Okay.
Oh no.
Oh no, Daddy, my phone is not working.
Here, no, it's working just fine. Look,
It's supposed to be
hello.
nice and
Yes,
quiet.
there
It's
it
not
is.
supposed to be so loud.
Okay.
Hello.
Right.
Anyway, we are here tonight to talk about a show we just finished rewatching on soon-to-be HBO Max / Discovery Plus.
And we're gonna have to talk about that whole HBO shift as well.
Mhm.
Hi, Grammy.
Yes.
Hi, Grammy.
But yeah, I just wanted to say I'm so glad we rewatched this show because it's one of my favorites.
Yeah,
and
me
it
too.
has been for a really long time. And
Very good. Classic era HBO show.
yeah, and funny story, I think, when I first watched not really funny story, but I think interesting story when it comes to just sort of how the times change or whatever. When I first watched 6 Feet Under, I was watching it maybe, it was still running, but it had been going for a couple years, and I was watching the DVDs, but the only way to get the DVDs at that time was through, I was getting them from the university library. There was a special branch of the library that was a media center.
Mm-hmm.
And you could borrow the DVDs, but this was back when if you wanted a DVD box set of an HBO show, each season was $100.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way that they would let you borrow the DVDs was you could only watch them in the media center.
Oh, yeah.
So I was borrowing them one disc at a time and watching them on of course back then my laptop had a disc drive. So I was watching them sitting in the library with my headphones, watching 4 episodes at a time until I got through the whole, I didn't get through the whole series that way, but it was the first couple seasons that I watched that way.
That's impressive.
Yeah. But at the time, I mean, that was just
that was that was the only way.
That was how precious it was. I mean, if you didn't have HBO, which I did not, and I mean, I suppose perhaps I could have rented it from somewhere.
Blockbuster, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But as far as getting it from the library, it was like, you will watch this inside the library. You can't leave the room with this.
We don't trust you.
Yeah, well, it's just like that's how precious the like HBO discs were.
Oh, yeah.
You know? But it did add, I think, a little bit of a sense of occasion to the experience for me. You know, it definitely wasn't the same as if I had just kind of randomly come upon the show and watched it, you know, in my living room. I think the intentionality of watching it that way kind of made me pay attention to it more, perhaps, than I would have otherwise. And I mean, I loved it. It was so good.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching The Sopranos on HBO, and I can't remember if they started at the same time or near the same time, or maybe it was like a season or two overlap, or I don't know how the timelines match up. I feel like I watched them together. You know, when I was watching Sopranos, I was also watching 6 Feet Under. But
I think they were somewhat within the same time range.
yeah,
they were,
I don't know that they were exactly starting at exactly the same time, but
and I definitely think The Sopranos was kind of a bigger deal, like in pop culture at the time. It was hyped more. I mean, I know 6 Feet Under did really well, but I think it definitely had like a smaller audience, maybe.
I definitely though I'm pretty sure I watched the pilot like when it like the night it dropped or whatever. Like I'm pretty sure I saw it.
Yeah.
The original.
And did you like it right away?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It was
because.
But it was kind of like, and we can get into this more, but it was a little bit of a different show than it turned into by the end, of course.
It was, and I definitely think, as far as who its target audience was, I think it was harder to know like who the show was for. I mean, I think I started watching it because my brother, who I don't even think watched it, heard about it somehow and told me that he thought I would like it because I was into like darker stuff than he was. Like I was like super into like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and so he was like, of course Ash will like this show about a family of undertakers. Like so even the reasons that he told me to watch it probably weren't even the reasons why I ultimately liked it. It just sort of incidentally like spun into being something that I was into.
Yeah. But that pilot though, I feel like they use a lot of like the commercials like for the products interspersed with like the drama of the family.
Oh, you're talking about how in the first episode they have, and perhaps if that was the only episode that you had seen, you would maybe think or perhaps fear that the whole show was going to be like
it's
that.
Not a trope that they like keep up throughout the show. Like they definitely introduce it as an idea just to like kind of get you into the world, I guess, of the story more.
I think to get you into the world of the story, and I think that they also do maintain sort of the aspect of people have these kind of like Broadway show-esque fantasy lives that they pop into. And that keeps going throughout the whole show. Not the commercial aspect, but the aspect of the characters will have a fantasy where suddenly they're doing like a song number or something.
Yeah.
Which I know is like your worst nightmare in general, to suddenly have someone be doing like a musical number.
But it's all in their imaginations. The Fishers have a very musical and kind of fantastical imagination. But
to me, the thing that's so great about that is that the Fishers are such a repressed family.
Yeah.
So it's a really great kind of a...
They're Episcopalian, which I definitely understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the background that you grew up in.
Yes.
So you can kind of understand that. I mean, like, I remember you telling me a story once about how there was like some people that left a congregation that you were a part of because there was some singing, but then the singing got too joyful, and for some it was very pleasurable, but for others it was like an offense where they were like, we can't be a part of this church anymore. It's strayed so far from what we like or something.
And who knows what other
maybe they had some other grievances going already and they were waiting for a chance to leave or something. But I do think that I don't think that all Episcopalians are like that repressed, but I do think that there's a certain sense of like a quietness.
Quiet decorum. And...
Yes. And I think the Fisher family definitely represents that kind of side of like...
Oh, sure.
Keeping it on the inside. But I think that it's great then that the show brings in this fantasy life where it's kind of the exact opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, rather than keeping it inside, being quiet, keeping it together, in these fantasy sequences, they're, putting on, like, a Broadway show. They're singing, they're dancing, there's, like, sparkly costumes, things that they would never in their real lives do.
Yeah, although David joins the...
He does join a choir, but...
choir, and
I feel
also
like the choir he joins is, like... It's not exactly, like, popping off. I mean, they're singing very traditional songs in a very traditional way.
Well, I think they're just trying to attract the largest audience of gay men in the Los Angeles area.
Yes, I'm just saying it's not like that choir itself is like doing really jazzy,
experimental.
Yeah, like they're pretty much just singing songs that I would expect to see like in a church or something.
Yeah, exactly.
The only difference is that it's just like a big group of gay men.
Yes. And speaking of which, I do feel like the church politics, especially kind of in the first season there, really play a big part in David's storyline. And also to his mom's to a degree, I guess. But when he becomes like a deacon or
Well, yes, because with David's story arc, we see in the beginning of the show, he's closeted.
Mm-hmm.
And which I think it's also fascinating too, because that show was made really kind of towards the last... It's so of its time. It's kind of towards the last wave of...
some might say a period.
When you might... It's not a period piece. It's made contemporarily.
We don't have to have this argument.
I don't want to have this argument with you now. Because you're so wrong and it makes me so angry.
Half the reason I keep going on about this is because I'm angry.
I don't think you understand how angry this makes me. A period piece is made about a period that it is not.
We can swerve out of this.
All right. Anyway, well, I was talking with my sister recently about how much certain things have changed just, in my lifetime, and even not just my lifetime, but even in certain segments of time between, because she's almost 8 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
So even differences between where the world was on certain issues when she was at certain points in her life versus where I was. Like, for example, I was telling her about how when I was in high school, I think a lot of people were still closeted.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, if I look back at people that I, were my high school contemporaries that I know now that are out, a lot of those people were not out back then.
Yes, it was more of a revolutionary act to be out at that point in history.
It was more normal to be closeted at that point.
Yes, you had more legal reason to.
Yes. Whereas now, though, I think it would almost be considered weird if someone is still closeted past a certain point.
I mean, the Supreme Court hadn't even overturned the sodomy laws yet. You couldn't even have gay sex in certain places.
Exactly. But so, like, a character like David... Yeah. At the time that show came out, he was closeted, and that seemed normal. And a lot of people, I think, that were watching that show to enter into the show, he might have been one of the first gay characters that they got to know really well.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that he was closeted seemed totally plausible and normal and made sense with the times. So, I think that's kind of an interesting look at just, where that show was rooted in time when it started.
I will say, too, that whole thing with the one congregation he goes to, what's like more conservative, and the one that's more progressive, that was a...
Well, that was happening then, too.
That was happening in the Episcopal Church at the time because of the very issue of gay marriage and gay rights and all that.
What I think what you're referring to is getting back to what we were saying about his story arc with the church, how when we first meet him, he's a part of a very kind of traditional conservative Episcopal church.
That his mom goes to.
Yes, that his mom goes to. I assume he grew up going to that church, and he's like the son that stayed and goes to church with his mom.
They bury all the old people.
Right. So it's kind of for business purposes too.
Yeah, of course. 100%.
But it's something that's been a big part of his life all along. But
he's internalized it.
But then now he is dating someone who actually is also an Episcopalian, but goes to kind of the liberal branch of the church across the city where all the gay people are welcome. And so then he's kind of dabbling in going to this other church, and then due to events that events transpire within his own church, he becomes a deacon kind of because he takes over his dad's seat. But then that immediately comes into conflict as far as his church is trying to be maintain conservative, and he comes into a position where he's not out, but I think he still feels that it would be a betrayal, to himself, and I, assume to his morals at large to, just kind of toe the line the way they're wanting him to.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what was really happening, as you were saying, at the time, with even, with the Episcopal Church, for real, there was stuff going on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because that was around the time when they were still, even in the show, I remember they had a storyline about how the father, the priest of, that conservative church, not at the church, but just separately officiated at a commitment ceremony between two women, and the church somehow found out about it, and then were, calling whether he could go on at the church into question. And that was around the time, too, that the church was, arguing about whether or not to affirm same-sex commitments and whether, they could have weddings in the church. And I know there was threatening to split.
Well, and then, that's another downstream effect of the legal status, because as long as it is against the law and you're not, doing the commitment ceremony didn't have the same force of law as an actual marriage would.
Right.
And so that was used as kind of legal covers to discriminate, because they're like, oh, you're not even doing a real ceremony, it's like the law's on our side, this isn't even real, what you're doing, and we object to it, and it's there's not, this is meaningless what you're doing, you're just doing this as an affront to God or whatever, and it's not even like you're actually marrying these people.
I think it puts the and this is kind of a sidebar, because the Father Jack, the priest that's kind of an ongoing character in 6 Feet Under, is kind of, I guess I would use the word weenus to describe him, but so what I'm about to say doesn't really apply to him, but I think in general, I think that tension between, whether or not to perform commitment ceremonies put a lot of clergy people into a very difficult moral situation if they morally felt like, I should perform this commitment ceremony because, they realize that it's the right thing to do. But is it you're going to be stripped of your job, and then where are you going to go? And it's kind of a narrow career field. If you're an Episcopal priest and then you get tossed for, going against what you were supposed to do, it's not like you can just go to another company and start working. I think you would have to start a new career or something, which I'm sure some people did. So it's a very fraught situation to try to do the right thing and still to try to maintain your overarching goal of doing it within this scenario. But that's an aside, because I was saying, I don't know if Father Jack, he did perform that one commitment ceremony, but he also, I feel kind of betrays David over and over again. He always kind of dangles the possibility that he's also gay in front of David to sort of get David to open up, almost to try to trick David into outing himself, but then always at the last minute kind of slams the door shut. So it's oh no, I was just trying to empathize with you, or oh no, you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean about how he always seems like he's kind of doing that?
Well, remember when David is drinking whiskey or whatever in his office with him, and they're like, those people are so uptight, and then he's plying him for information.
Exactly, he uses the fact that he may or may not actually be gay, but seems kind of gay. Yeah,
he never comes out and says it.
But he just uses the fact that he possibly could be gay to kind of bait David into undermining himself, or to you know what I mean, to exposing himself when maybe he wouldn't have wanted to, and to feel like he has support, but then to actually publicly then not give him any support.
Yeah, exactly. But they were going to bring in a new priest. There was that whole storyline about the new priest that they were going to hire, and he was like, is this guy too liberal? Is he gay?
Right.
Perform ceremonies.
Yeah, no, that whole thing was very, very uncomfortable. But going back into more of an overarching, we rewatched the show.
Yes.
Because I feel like we've gone on kind of a tangent just on David, which, there's a lot to say about him. But I do want to talk more about the general rewatching of the show at large. Because there have been other shows that I have loved and rewatched and that have not held up. I think this show holds up incredibly well, but I also think that this is one of the best shows of all time.
It is. It was revolutionary for a lot of reasons. Like you said, the prominent gay character being one. That was pretty
and that's just
television.
one small aspect of it. I mean, I think it brought us a lot of really original characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it so easily could have gone wrong as far as, like, oh, it's a family of undertakers. Like, that could have been so uncomfortable or, like, hokey. Like, it could have veered in, like, an uncomfortable Seventh Heaven kind of direction. You know, like, it could have been, like, heartwarming and, like, a weird, like, you know, or it could have been, like, too campy or something. But I think it really confronts so many issues of, you know, uncomfortable issues about death, but also just about life too, you know?
Yeah.
And just kind of the tension between, you know, the family's awareness of how real death is.
The living in the funeral home aspect is mystifying to me.
I could not do that. I mean, here's the thing that
I couldn't do that as a job.
Show never really
I definitely
explains.
couldn't live there. I just couldn't do it.
The show never really explains how the Fisher family got into the funeral business. Because,
didn't he come back from Vietnam and
Yes.
then he, like...
We assume,
started the business after that?
Maybe. That's what we don't know. Okay, all we know is that the senior, Mr. Fisher...
Nathaniel Fisher Sr.
was in Vietnam, and then he came back. He and Ruth had already gotten married before he went to Vietnam. They had kind of a emergency marriage, you know.
Of Nate.
Yes. But we know that, you know, he came back from Vietnam and they were in the funeral business. What we don't know is, was his family in that business previously and that's why they were doing this? Or did it just somehow occur to them as a career opportunity? Mm-hmm. And the reason I always wondered about this is that I just don't understand. I mean, I guess even if his family had been in the business, someone way back would have had to get into it. I kind of have never understood how this occurs to someone as a career opportunity.
Didn't he say that his father was in it?
I don't really remember. And I was kind of looking out for that.
But isn't I may be misremembering this, but wasn't there a Nate, the junior, of course, scene where he is imagining talking to his father, and he's like, oh, why am I doing this? I tried to run away from this. And then Nate Sr. is like, oh, it was just the easiest thing. I just did it because my father did it or something. Wasn't there a scene like that at some point?
I think I know what you mean, but I wasn't sure if he was talking about Nate or...
Yeah.
So, but...
Because he is having both sides of the conversation.
Yes, because that's the thing, is that all the conversations with dead people are really just you talking to yourself.
Exactly. And that's what... in whether or not it's like... That's what's brilliant about the show, because it's like... Every person that comes in that like sits up and starts talking to them, obviously it's David, it's Nate, it's all in your head.
Yeah, it's in your head. It's the voice. It's often your antagonistic voice, or you know,
Claire's talking to her dad, but the dad is really Claire. You know.
Yeah, well, and it's like, and he's different for each of them because he is who they are projecting onto him.
Yes.
But yeah, so I don't know. I might want to like rewatch or like investigate or something to figure that out. But anyway, it is really mystifying, and the show doesn't really do anything to really clear it up how it would be like the leap that you would make.
I just sort of thought that Vietnam was so horrific that he was like
maybe he saw a lot of dead bodies and he was just like,
wasn't he a medic or something, or wasn't
probably something terrible like that. So I mean, he probably
saw a lot of death.
You could imagine that he was just like, I've been around death, I can deal with this in a way that maybe a lot of people couldn't. But then, although he was also like a very broken person.
And then he had like a secret room
and like the giant marijuana like monthly like subscription or whatever. So I mean, he definitely had like his own, like he wasn't dealing with it totally well. I just mean like that leap to be like, we will do this as a family. Because I mean, at the end of the show, of course, we have two more families making that leap. I mean, we have David and Keith deciding that they're going to kind of go all in and make it a family business with their boys. And then we have Rico.
I think you mean. Oh well, yeah.
No, I'm saying David and Keith. They're going to go all in. So I mean, that's kind of.
But David was already in, and Rico.
David was already in, but there's a difference between
Vanessa and Keith were not in. Now they're in.
Well, there's a difference between David being an undertaker and leaving at the end of the day and going home to a separate home where he lives with Keith. And
he's
his
also
kids.
doing his separate job.
Yeah, that's like David is an undertaker. That's a big part of his life, but it's not his whole, or a funeral director. They don't use the word undertaker, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's not his whole life. I think once you, like they do at the end of the show, actually move into the family funeral home. That's more like you've made it your whole life. It's kind of like being a farmer when you live on the farm. Mm-hmm. It's not just your job, it's your whole life. Like, you are a farmer.
I think clients like that, though.
Sure, I'm just saying it's a big leap for David, and even more so for Keith, and to be like, yes, mm-hmm. we will commit to, like, this is what we do. It's kind of like if your spouse wants to buy a farm. You
kind of have to be a farmer with them.
Yeah, so it's like, are you going to be a farmer also? Like, this is a huge part of your identity and and what your life is going to be like.
Yeah.
It's going to be revolving around this. And the same for once you move into the funeral home. So, I mean, that's a huge leap. And then, yeah, like you mentioned Rico and Vanessa and how at the end they're excitedly starting their own funeral home. Mm-hmm. For them, it made more sense, though.
Yes.
Like, I do think that one small weak point, and I think that the end of 6 Feet Under is one of the best crafted endings to a show. But I do think that the whole Keith deciding to go all in with David and move into the funeral home is a weak point, because I didn't totally buy it.
Keith never expressed any desire to live in that house.
He always kind of seemed more like he was humoring the fact that David did this just because he knew that it was part of who David was, not because he was like particularly like, oh yes, I could become a part of this. Whereas it makes sense to Rico and Vanessa because, I mean, Vanessa's already a nurse. It's kind of, and she already at one point I think was working in a nursing home, so she's already working with a lot of like bodily fluids and grieving and stuff like that, so it's not really such a leap for her. Mm-hmm. I also think kind of financial situation wise too, like Rico and Vanessa are more sort of like building themselves into a new category as far as like their financial mobility than where they start out. Like, because when they start out... they spend that inheritance into a share of the Fishers, and then they use that to spend into their own thing by the end of the show, and so... ownership is their ultimate goal, I think. Because it's not where they started out. They started out in a situation where they don't have ownership of anything. They don't have, I don't think, like, their families don't have, like, a lot of money to, like, back them up or help them or anything. It's a different situation. Except for her sister. Yes.
That's a whole other situation.
But I just mean, like, they don't have, like, a solid foundation of, like, financial support.
The Fishers grew up in that house.
Yes, they own the house.
Yes. Fisher and Sons, right?
And they have, and they have enough money, obviously, to, like, for example, when the dad dies, he leaves Claire a trust fund that's going to, like, pay for her entire college.
Yeah. It's like, I could be a great artist in New York if somebody give me it.
And, like, they leave Ruth enough money that she's not, like, concerned about getting a job now that her husband's dead. I think a lot of women...
She gets a job for, like, the busyness aspect of it. And be close to,
I think a lot of women who are, like, the, like, at-home person while their husband is, like, earning the money... if their husband was to unexpectedly die, would then need to go out and get a job. So I'm saying, like...
She doesn't need to go
need to go out and get a job.
She's
so I'm saying the Fishers...
enough not to have to.
Yeah, like, the Fishers have, like, a pretty stable, like, financial bedrock. Yeah. Like, whereas, I'm saying that's a very different situation than, like, Rico and Vanessa's family. Like, they don't really have that backup to, like, draw off of. Mm-hmm. So they're really more trying to build themselves up. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity for them to get into the business and finally have something that's, like, beyond what they could have had before or maybe thought they would be able to have. Mm-hmm. Whereas, it just seems it's very bizarre for Keith to, like...
It's kind of a left turn.
Yeah.
But it does wrap things up very nicely.
It does.
But what do you think about... who the main character of the show is?
You seem particularly concerned about this, and...
You don't seem concerned at all.
I always saw it as an ensemble piece. I think it gives a lot of attention to various people. I think the two most important people in the show are Nate and Claire.
Yes.
And I think that Nate and Claire often parallel each other. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways. I mean, think about, like... The way that the show begins is that Nate comes back to town, and then the way the show ends is that Claire leaves town.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But the show goes on without Nate for a couple episodes.
It's not without him. He has died. He's still an important figure in the show.
I'm just saying, you can speculate whatever you want about the end of The Sopranos. The end of The Sopranos could very well end with Tony getting...
Do you think perhaps the end of The Sopranos is the moment of Tony's death and it's like, alright, it's over?
That's my theory. But I'm saying, like, Tony starts as the main character and he ends as the main character.
I don't see 6 Feet Under as having a single main character. I think it's an ensemble piece. I think that you could argue that all of the like immediate members of the Fisher family are main characters. I think that there are certain characters that are more important.
So everyone whose death they chronicle in the finale is the main character.
No, because they chronicle some side characters' deaths.
They don't chronicle Billy or George or...
I assume that Billy drops dead a couple seconds after Brenda.
Of course. I do think it is hilarious.
That was the funniest death scene.
Yes.
When and the fact that he's still talking about Claire and Ted, and then Brenda's just like just doesn't have it in her to like keep going with the God. She maybe just wanted out of that conversation.
Just wanted it out bad enough.
But the thing is, okay, I don't see it as like there's a single main character. I think that it's a split, like
the Fisher family.
Yeah, the Fisher family specifically. Not everybody though. Like. I mean, not like, for example, Keith is a side character, even though he gets his own storyline somewhat. I'm talking like the core nuclear family at the beginning, Nate, David, Claire, and Ruth.
What do you, before we just hold that thought, but what do you think of the fact, keeping with that same mindset of the Fisher family as the nucleus, what do you think of the fact that Brenda is the only non-Fisher who gets a solid, like, you wouldn't call her a side character in this show, I wouldn't think.
No, well, you wouldn't call Rico exactly a side character either, though, and he gets a pretty solid, like, we follow him.
Vanessa's not, and Keith is not, and Lisa is not.
True.
Why do you think the show carves her out an exception?
Well, I don't think it's an exception because I do think that we also follow Rico.
Rico's not a significant other of a Fisher.
True, but he is significantly tied to
let me put it this way. No other significant other of a Fisher is a main character. Besides Brenda.
Yeah, that is worth
I mean, she's also the mother of 2 of the children.
I think she's just integral to the show. She's the mother of 2 of the children. She's also the sister of Billy, who for a time is with Claire. But okay, like, the fact that Billy and Claire are enmeshed, I think, kind of goes back to what I was saying about how I see Nate and Claire as often kind of parallels or reflections of each other. Like, even to the point where they're creepily, like, dating siblings.
One scene I love is when Billy and Claire are talking, and Claire is like, yeah, what do you think of the fact that we're both with each other, but that you're with, she puts it as if it's like only him that's doing it, what do you think of the fact that you're with your sisters, whatever, and he's like, well, what do you think of the fact that you're with
yeah, and then it's like so awkward they both have to change the subject. Like, I do think though that that's one of those things where it's like it became awkward partially though because I mean, even though it is weird, of course, that Claire is with Billy, I feel like, obviously, the Brenda and Billy relationship is so much more unhealthy than the Claire and Nate, that it's awkward. It's mostly awkward because it's like, Claire knows that Billy and Brenda have an unhealthy connection. And so to actually point out the fact that part of the reason he's dating her is because she is the sister of Brenda's husband and that's the closest he can get to Brenda at this time, it's not appropriate to do within the confines of a relationship, even though it's, like, honest and true. You know what I mean? Like, it's, like, unspeakably, like, awkward. It's like we all know this, but, like, we can't speak of this and continue on.
Yeah.
But I mean, let's talk a little bit more about Brenda and Billy because, because I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, there's
like a suitcase, a whole lot to unpack. Yeah, there's it's interesting. I don't know. I think they definitely toy with the idea of them crossing the line many times in the show.
I think it's an idea that's kind of floating
Keeps coming
there
up again and again.
Yeah, because it's uncomfortable, and I mean it's more interesting to explore uncomfortable ideas probably.
So, what do you think of the role of Nathaniel and Isabel?
I enjoy that very much, but I have a special. I want to find a name for this.
Mm-hmm.
I know the name for the thing itself, but I want to find a name for myself as a fan of this particular thing. I have a special fascination with art that is created only to exist within another piece of art. Like, for example, when you watch a movie and a character in the movie is a painter, someone has to have, created all those paintings for that painter in the movie to have, pretend created. Mm-hmm. And it can be very awkward because within a piece of art, when there's art, the art is often valued within the, let's say there is art, visual art that's created with, or written art, that's any sort of art that's created within a TV show or a movie. It's usually valued by the characters inside the thing. This is good, or it's doing so well, or this is terrible, or whatever. Vamonos amigos. Exactly. Into the friscolating dusklight he goes. But, so within the world of the story, it's valued in a certain way, but then we, the audience, also are looking at it, and it's is this actually good? Mm-hmm. When a character of yours is making art and, somehow succeeding as an artist, and you're looking at the art that they're making, and you're just what is this? Mm. So I think there's a lot of layers to creating art to go inside of something. And I enjoy that aspect of just, who is making the art for this, and, how is this happening? But also I really enjoy the aspect of, the art that's created inside of the story in order to reflect or parts of the story. So, with Nathaniel and Isabel, this is a series of children's books that were created, for the story, that exist only in the story, and it's that Billy and Brenda read and identified with these books as children, and these books are incredibly warped, but of course Billy and Brenda are also incredibly warped.
But they have matching tattoos.
Well, I mean, that comes into play very early in the series when Billy has had, a severe mental health decline, and he tries to, I think realizing that his connection to Brenda is unhealthy and that she's trying to pull away, he he cuts off his own tattoo, and then he, comes at her with...
That's at the end of season 1.
A blade, to try to, cut hers off as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, then he has to be, taken away to the hospital and everything.
But he slowly comes back.
But yeah, he comes back and, continues to poke around the edges of the show. Mm-hmm. Manages to date Claire. And I do like how the show, when it explores an idea that's interesting, it doesn't really let the idea die, it brings it back. So, I mean, with Billy and Brenda, when we first meet Billy, it's when Nate first meets Billy. He's just gotten into this relationship with Brenda, and then suddenly there's this, inappropriately naked man in her house, and he's is this some guy that she just hooked up with? It takes him a while to even figure out that it's her brother, and so there's always that air of, the question mark and the inappropriateness, and of course that, you feel that comes to a head in the first season with, the tattoo incident. Mm-hmm. But we come back around to, explore that again towards the end.
And all through, really.
All through, but I think especially towards the end when they know the show's ending, they have to really ratchet up and be we're going to push us as far as we're going to push it. Of course, then they had the escape hatch at the end where it's a dream. I think they had to, but that was an important dream for Brenda because that's when she decided that she was going to
not
run away from that.
Saskatchewan and pretend that they were married.
Yeah, she could have made a huge mistake. Whew. But that dream woke her up to the idea that would be a huge mistake, and so then I think she leans back into having a normal life instead. So, I mean, that was actually, I think, a good thing for her ultimately.
That was a good revelation for her.
It's sometimes you have a dream about something and you realize how terribly wrong it would be, and then you're all right, I'm going to steer the car in another direction.
Totally.
But also, another thing with Billy is, in the very first season, he and Claire have that flirtation.
Yes.
Where, you know, he, like, creepily picks her up from school and, like, takes her picture. But you kind of think that's, like, a one-off. But then, of course, like, several seasons later, they're, like, living together. And it seems like they're in, like, a very serious relationship, you know, until he's searching for his ski rack shirt, and then it all kind of goes downhill. And then his mom is trying to, like, pay Claire to, like, date him again. It's, like, a very low moment for everyone. But you see what I'm saying? Like, the show dips its toe into something, and then it comes back to explore it again later, which I appreciate. Instead of just, like, abandoning concepts.
Yes.
Because I think that's more realistic to real life. Like, in real life, I think concepts or, like, situations that are a part of people's lives do tend to, like, arise again and again. Things don't just happen as a one-off and then go away.
Yeah. Here's something I want to talk about that I have a problem with the show about. I think... You know, the old adage with fiction is you're supposed to make it difficult for your main characters. So, of course, I can't quibble too much with the idea behind it. But they really don't let any main character get away unscathed throughout the show. Like they keep... and I guess in that way it's very true to life because everyone is flawed and everyone...
No one is portrayed
glory or whatever, but
no one is really portrayed in a flattering light.
And also, terrible things either happen to people or kind of through their own, you know, decisions happen to themselves.
I was very disappointed with the storyline with David where he's carjacked.
Well, that's what I'm.
I think that's my least
that's
favorite.
What I'm driving at.
That's my least favorite story arc, and it was unnecessary to David's.
And it kind of like took the air out of his character a little bit, and like
in a way that I thought was unnecessary because David was such an interesting character right from the start.
Yeah, you didn't need that to be interesting.
Well, and he progressed to so many things. I mean, because like we talked about, you know, in the beginning he was closeted, and that was a huge issue for him to work through, like coming out and kind of finding how he was going to, you know, have his new life now that he was like living more truthfully, and also trying to like figure out his relationship with Keith, and then their journey of trying to put their family together as far as like wanting to have kids. That was interesting enough. I do not think we needed to throw this horrible carjacking thing into it.
Yeah, that's probably the most egregious example. I think to a lesser degree, the Rico Infinity storyline.
The Rico Infinity storyline annoys me, but I feel like...
No, I enjoy it more than I enjoy the carjacking one, to be clear. But, like, Rico's character never really recovers from that moment, and like it's like kind of a fatal flaw. I mean,
in some ways, though, I think it's good. And see, I originally was really bummed about that because I was like, oh man, Rico, because you're always kind of fond of him from the beginning. Oh, but then rewatching
the worst thing about him was his homophobia, but that was almost just a cultural.
It seemed like a very cultural thing, and so we were kind of able to forgive him and hope that he would just sort of get over it over time, I guess. But I actually grew to appreciate the Infinity storyline more upon this rewatching, just in the sense that I feel like even though Keith also exists in the world of the story, I definitely think Rico's character was possibly in danger of being like the token super great minority guy. Mm-hmm. Like the Fishers are like the whitest white people who've ever like white peopled. And then Rico is like, you know, this person from, you know, outside of that who's like a part of the situation, you know, due to being, you know, employed there. And he was so like nice for the first few seasons that I definitely think he was in danger of seeming like he was lacking the dimension that they gave the other characters, because they're very cruel to the other characters, as you were just saying, and none of the other characters are really totally good people. They all do horrible things, and many of them are very self-centered, and they make terrible choices, and they do really unflattering things that don't look great. So I think that the first couple seasons, Rico seemed like just... You know what I'm looking for? What is the word for that minority character that's super easy for a racist person to like? But you see what I'm saying.
It's like, a trope in fiction.
Yes, but I was trying to find a nicer way to say that. But anyway, yes, we're all no, you can say that. We're all clear on what we're talking about here. So, but you see what I'm saying about... The
minority character who swoops down and is like twice as good and...
Yes, and then I think Rico was definitely in danger of that. Because, like, while the Fishers are all doing, you know, super, like, questionable things, when we first, the first couple seasons, Rico's just like, other than his homophobia, he's like hardworking, he's like a young father, but he's like married to the woman, and together they're both working so hard, and they've got like the cutest kids, and they're just trying to like buy a house. And so I do think that having Rico do something really morally like incredibly shaky was good, in the sense that like it gave his character more depth and more interest and took him away from being that thing that he was in danger of being for the show. So I think that was good. But yes, it was very upsetting, because I mean, I was fond of Rico, and then it's just the whole situation with Infinity, just...
Because I feel like he would have totally gone with Infinity had she, like, you know what I mean? Like,
I just think he was so out of his depth that he didn't even, like, know what he was doing. Like, he was just completely...
And the fact that he was, like, passing it off as charity was, like, the extra...
That was so gross. But then I think in that season, though, it's not like he's just bad about Infinity. It actually kind of reveals that he's a terrible person in general. Not just terrible in the aspect of being unfaithful to his family. Also terrible because that is during the same period of time that he lies about someone dying. Remember?
I don't even think he ever has a reckoning for that, does he?
No, he doesn't. And he gets back together with Vanessa. By the end of the thing, he's rehabilitated himself. He's back home with his family.
I guess we can just assume that they never ran into Jenna Fisher again.
I certainly hope not. Yeah.
We can hope. I mean, LA's a
like,
big place.
I actually think it just reveals the fact that Rico is kind of a crappy person. I mean, more than kind of. He's like actually a very crappy person. But I also think it's good that he is then able to be rehabilitated after that, because I know a lot of crappy people that are just like still doing it, you know? And so I think that's more realistic. It's actually unrealistic to think that someone does something terrible and then everyone finds out and they're ostracized and society turns against them and they keep going. In real life, people do horrible things all the time, and either people decide to ignore it and just keep going, or people just don't know how to address it, so they just kind of freeze up and just have to kind of tolerate it while secretly being upset about it forever. I think that's more the reality of like people that do awful things.
I did enjoy the scene of when Rico goes to live at the Fishers after he gets kicked out by Vanessa, and he's talking to Ruth, and he's like, I did something really bad, and she's like, oh, you and Vanessa have always had a strong relationship, and he's like, I cheated on her, I was unfaithful, and then Ruth was like, better Rico, and he's like, Ruth, like, because like we know from the beginning of the show,
we know that she was
going camping, and I'm doing air quotes about that, with Ed Begley Jr. from the very beginning of the show, while she was still technically married to Nathaniel Sr.
That's very true.
So,
but that's a perfect example. I mean, Ruth Fisher, I don't know if I would call her likable. I think she's a great character.
She's relatable.
She's interesting. And she's not like pretty much any other character you see on TV. I mean, she's like just even as far as just kind of like her age and the thing she's going through, like dating at like the point in life that she's in, and also not in like a kind of scary meow cougar sort of way. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like she looks age appropriate to how old she is. She's not like. It's not like they got a 37-year-old actress to play her, even though she's supposed to be 60, and she has, like, implants and has, like, some work done, and it's, like, you know what I mean? Like, they had, like, a actual realistic person of her age who's been living, like, kind of a, you know, the sort of quiet lifestyle that she's been living. But she's still, like, a sexually, like, alive person, even if her partners are all very scary. Mm-hmm. She's still, like, I think that's a more interesting avenue than I think a lot of shows have gone down with a character like her.
Mm-hmm. I do like that she, throughout the show, is like, you can tell that she's kind of stagnated in the role of who she's been for so long through her cooking. You know, like, she's always forever cooking these, like, massive, like...
like a giant, like a crown roast for that should be like feeding. Yeah, it's like a dinner that should feed 16 people on like an Easter or something, but she's making it on like a Wednesday night.
Yeah, for her and David.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's like, how many potatoes were you planning to roast tonight?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like always like the giant pieces of meat and like the
huge portions. And does she even save the leftovers? Who knows?
I do think that she saves the leftovers though, because David often eats lunch there. So I think that she actually I think she probably does carve those roasts to make sandwiches throughout the week.
I see.
So I mean, I don't think it's quite as wasteful as it seems, but it is still a lot.
But I think she started doing that when she had a family of 5.
And 2 of them, when she had 2 teenage boys, I mean, you've seen the way our small children eat. Yeah. Sometimes I just feel like I want to open up the fridge and just be like, just take it all, take everything.
You're very hungry people.
But I'm just saying, so I can only imagine having 2 teenage boys in the house and Claire when she was a little girl and the dad and everything. I assume that that food was more getting used.
Yes. But yeah, no, that's, I think, what happens a lot to people. And then all of a sudden this life change has happened where it's she doesn't necessarily need to do that kind of thing anymore. And she's
it's the habit dating of how she's been living.
She's dating again. She's not, Claire's out of the house pretty much. It's she's in a whole new phase of her life where she doesn't need to make a rump roast on Tuesday.
Right.
But
then, I mean, we were talking about how Nate and Claire parallel each other in a lot of ways. I also think there's an interesting... I think that one of the things that the show explores, though, because it's not really just Nate and Claire, it's how different characters either parallel each other or exist with a tension between each other. So speaking of Ruth, then I was thinking about her relationship with Claire. Because they're kind of the 2 main Fisher women. And so much of who Claire is not wanting to be Ruth.
Yeah, definitely. But ending up becoming very much like Ruth.
Although not so much because, in the end, of course, Claire offers to stay home, just like Nate did in the beginning. In the beginning, remember, and Ruth takes him up on it, but in the end, Ruth is like, no, Claire, go. Because she doesn't want Claire to become her and, stay home when she wanted to go and have adventures and become someone else out in the world and just kind of, she doesn't want that for her. But so much of who Claire is throughout the show is just she's always kind of putting her mom down and not wanting to spend time with her and criticizing her for being, frumpy and dour and oh, what are you doing with your life?
But she does end up going with Ted.
She does, but I don't think Ted has anything in common with Nathaniel Sr. Ted is just the nicest unicorn Republican who's ever he's nicer than any of the nice people. He's the nicest person ever, right?
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's you can tell that he's this hotshot young lawyer and he probably hangs out with other Republicans all day, and things probably went well. His parents are still together, I think he said.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, okay, if you have a great childhood, a happy home, your parents have a great relationship, and they love you in the way that you need to be loved, and you feel seen and celebrated and nurtured, and then you have happy times and your childhood memories are all good days, boating at the lake and eating noodle salad. You don't really have any reason to try to go change from that. I think people tend to change from their family when they feel when there's things that weren't going great that they then want to be I will do something different. If you're just man, my family was so awesome, I hope I can just have a life exactly like this. You have no reason to try to do something different because you really just want what they have,
Yeah.
And what you already have, you just want to keep having it.
One tension that I don't really think the show handled coherently was I never felt like they were clear on Nathaniel Jr.'s motivations and him either moving away from the business or moving towards it. The show like kept being like whenever he'd do the thing where he talked to his dad, and he would always be like, I always did what everyone wanted or something. And it's like, well, no, you moved to Seattle until your dad died.
I don't think he said that he did what everyone wanted. I thought they were totally clear on this. See, because my perspective was he left home when he was like 17 or whatever, because he was like wanted to be like rebellious and like move to Seattle and like do whatever it was that he was doing there, which ultimately ended up, living with Lisa and working at the Whole Foods.
He was assistant grocery. What was he?
He was like assistant of like produce acquisitions or something. Yeah. But anyway, so he left because he like didn't want to go in the family business, and apparently also didn't want to like go to college or like do anything else. Then he comes back, and I feel like when he came back, it's easy for him to blame Ruth for him staying, because like she asked him to stay and he says he'll stay. And sure, wanting to stay for her is part of why he stays. Mm-hmm. If he actually didn't want to stay, he
also stays for Brenda.
He stays for Brenda, and he stays for himself, because despite what he says about being the assistant produce manager or whatever, he's clearly not like achieved anything like incredibly resplendent. And so and Nate, throughout the whole show, he's looking for like meaning in life. Like like he is a crappy person, but he always wants to feel like the meaning in something. And so when Ruth asks him to stay, if he didn't want to stay, he would have totally just left. It's an opportunity for him to feel like he's being noble. And that's what he really wants. He wants, like, Nate's, I think, driving force is that he wants to feel like a good person. Staying because his mom asked him to stay is a huge opportunity to feel like a good person. And then getting into this business that he didn't want to be in because he somehow feels like he's good at it is like an opportunity to feel like he intrinsically has some sort of like spiritual calling or great power or something. And that's always something that he's kind of chasing too. Mm-hmm. So I feel like for him, it's all about like, he wants to feel like a good person. And so that was like his power move, was to like say yes. Cause like, of course a good person would stay with their mom. And of course a good person would actually be good at helping people in their time of grief.
But then he keeps, like, waffling back and forth and being like, this is all just pretend, this is masking what's really happening, and we should just be like, blah, blah, blah. Why are we embalming people?
He's never going to be satisfied. He's always chasing
it's like,
that elusive...
What do you think this is?
He's seeking that elusive experience that will be so powerful that it will feel authentic. Like, he wants, like, a spiritual experience from life. Which is why, of course, he ends up cheating on Brenda with Maggie. Because, like, he feels like somehow her, like, presence and her, like, Quakerism that he's, like, being drawn to, he thinks that that will lead him into this more authentic spiritual life that he's not been able to put together for himself.
So is George a Quaker?
No. Maggie converted for her ex-husband, and then she just stayed with it because I guess she liked it. I mean, she liked it enough to convert, but I think she really was like into it. And I mean, she's also kind of a crappy person too. So I don't know. I think
there's another family connection.
Yeah, it was very incestuous show. I mean, yeah.
Was George and
I don't think they had gotten divorced yet, but I think they were separated. Because remember when she calls Nate crying because she wants Nate to confirm for her that Ruth has really left her dad, because Ruth had like set him up in the apartment but was like still pretending to be like living there, but Maggie was like suspecting that Ruth doesn't really live there, and she was like, Nate, you can tell me anything, because she wants him to tell her whether or not Ruth has actually left. That was like right around that time. Like that was like one episode before. So, I mean, Ruth and George were, like, barely separated. And even if they had already been divorced, I don't feel like those kind of boundaries just come away like that.
Yeah.
I think once someone's your step-sibling, they're your step-sibling.
I think you should just consider that off limits, probably.
Yeah. Yes.
Just my personal opinion.
Yes, you should.
But I do think Brenda just has the worst timing in the world, not by her own fault, of course, just through the course of events in the show, like with her wedding first, and then like...
Oh, the show is so mean to Brenda.
I know. She never gets a break.
Having the miscarriage on her wedding, and then she's like finally pregnant after like the struggle, and then her husband like dies literally fucking someone else. Like,
but even before that, he's like pressuring her to get a abortion, and because it might have something wrong with it. And
but that's just because he didn't actually want to have the baby either way, and this is just an excuse for him to try to get out of it.
And then, yes, of course that happens with Maggie, but then even after that, there's more pain to come, because remember when he's in the hospital and he wakes up for a little while and he's like, oh, we should not be together, I'm dumping you while I'm in the hospital. Whereas she was obviously,
I feel like even though she knew what he had done, she was willing to try to like work through it, because it's like we're in this like very awkward place.
It's like, can you wait to like stand up on your 2 feet before you like dump somebody? Like, can you just like...
But that's just like further proving that Nate is awful, because I mean, he should have, like, he also doesn't care, he has very poor planning skills. I mean...
Well, clearly.
When he decides, I realize this is more of like a housekeeping issue, but like, when he decides to break up with Brenda while he's in the hospital, who does he think is going to care for his toddler daughter that now that he's like trying to break up with like the stepmother? Also, you know that Nate is the kind of person that would justify like, oh, it's better for Maya if I am with Maggie, who I really love, and so she can see a real relationship than the fake relationship with Brenda. Not thinking that, like, maybe it's bad for Maya that, like, first her original mom dies, then you immediately move in with Brenda and have her start calling Brenda mommy, and basically Brenda does all the child care. And then you're just like, all right, Brenda, I'm done with you, while Brenda is, like, enormously pregnant with, like, your other sibling. It's just like, oh, peace out, Brenda. Like, I think Nate is an incredibly selfish person.
Yes, well, clearly.
But he probably knows that about himself, and that's why he's so fixated on trying to do things that seem selfless, like staying with his family when they asked him to. Because it's like, if you know you're super selfish, it's like, oh yes, this is my chance to do something that proves I'm actually a good person. But it's like, no. Maybe the real miracle that he could have used would be to just not be so crappy to everyone all the time.
I did like that Maggie brought Brenda a quiche. Yeah. That was...
I liked the part where they're in the hospital and Maggie's just like still there, and it's like she doesn't want to be there anymore and no one else wants her to be there, but like she can't leave.
Yeah.
It's like she doesn't want to be there, but she knows that it would seem too crappy to leave.
Doesn't Brenda insist that she stay though, just for the uncomfortableness of it?
Yes. But it's also like Brenda doesn't actually want her there, she just doesn't want to let her leave. So it's like no one wants her to be there, but it's like I also
it's
can't
like
let
she's
her
like
leave.
shoving her face in it while she still can, you know. Like,
yeah, which I think that's fair.
of course. Yeah. Oof.
Let's talk about Claire a little bit more, because I feel like she has just the worst development as an artist. Like, I mean, like we talked about, like when you make art inside of a show, it can be interesting. And I feel like, because a very large portion of her story is her kind of deciding to go to art school and then making terrible art on an ongoing basis pretty much throughout the entire show until she kind of stops making art before she, dramatically resurges at the end to become like a famous photographer or something.
Yeah, she totally but claims complete solo credit for the idea of like the tearing up the faces and then gluing it on the faces, and then...
I felt for Russell about that, but then that was so eclipsed by his just general terribleness that I ended up kind of siding with Claire.
I mean, when he tackled the lollipop, or
when he
or do you mean when he totally has sex with Olivier?
Yeah, when he totally has sex with Olivier, when he tries to tackle the giant lollipop sculpture.
Yeah. When
he tries to shame Claire for having the abortion.
Yeah.
Which, not that this necessarily would have changed anything, but let us not forget that she was like unexpectedly pregnant while finding out that he had like slept with their teacher.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of characters that really hang on to the end, Olivier.
I know, you keep expecting Olivier to not be a part of the show anymore, and then he just kind of is still there.
Yeah, exactly. I do wonder if in, like, after, like, Me Too or whatever, if he would have, like, been swept away, but who knows?
Now, are you saying that he would have been fired from the art school?
I would hope so.
You mean just because he slept with, like, so many of his students?
And, like, yeah.
Okay, now here, how gross is it, though, that he slept with, I mean, going back to how incestuous the show is, how gross is it that he slept with both Billy and Mother Chenoweth? Because he ends up in, like, a long-term relationship
Right?
with, what is her first name? You know, Billy and Brenda's mom.
Chenoweth, Chenoweth.
Yeah, whatever Mother Chenoweth's name is. It's not Mother Chenoweth, but you know what I mean? Like, I know that the dad was named Byrne, but, like, what was her name? I don't remember.
I don't know.
But you know who I'm talking about,
Yes,
I think
of
everyone
course.
else will, too. But yes, like, he ends up in a long-term relationship with her, which is, like, who saw that coming?
Well, they're at the art show smoking their husband's cancer pot, and then...
But then it's, like, a year later, he's, like, holding the baby at, like, Brenda's, like, family dinner, like...
It's like, you're still here. Wow, okay. Claire doesn't even go to the school anymore. Billy doesn't teach at the school anymore.
Does he not?
Well, he quit, remember?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because they were going to move to, like, Barcelona or something. Before things went so wrong.
I love the endless pool of money that Brenda and Billy continually pull from.
They sort of vaguely tried to explain that in the very end when Brenda is like says, "Oh, I inherited a lot of money from my dad and Nate had life insurance." Remember that?
But even before that happens...
Even before that, okay, remember when we first meet Brenda?
What is her job
She's
again?
a massage therapist, which I've known people who are massage therapists.
How
Like,
many
they don't make
clients,
that much money.
But how many clients? She's not even taking that many
I feel
clients.
like Brenda
is she?
has like 3 clients a month
Yeah,
for like a large portion of the show. And yet somehow she's still living in like a very nice house for like California.
in Los Angeles.
Yeah. Like
a bungalow.
did Brenda somehow get money from that Charlotte Light and Dark situation maybe?
Maybe it's like an emotional distress.
I don't know if there was some
something.
sort of like royalties or like I don't know. I'm just saying somehow Brenda has an endless pool of money to like draw off of.
And Billy.
Yes. We don't see Billy's life as much, so it's...
Yeah, but I think a lot of that goes to rehab.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, we don't see, like... We see Brenda's house over and over again. Like, we see what Brenda's house, we see what kind of things she has, her lifestyle. We only get some little glimpses into Billy's life.
But he's able to, like, buy random stuff and not have it, like,
yes.
really affect him.
And he does buy random stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I think that's more when he's, like, having, like, an episode, though.
How often does that happen?
I mean, a couple times in the course of the show, which spans, like, a few years,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But I do think that Billy's character is well done in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the kind of energy that he brings to the show, I think, is very authentically recognizable as someone who's having, like, the kind of issues that he...
Isn't the first time we see him, he's just, like weeping and, like walking across the kitchen, and
That
Brenda
was one, I think that was, like, a couple times in.
Okay.
That's the first time we see him kind of coming...
Are you sure that's not, like, the first time we see him?
No, the first time we see him, he's, like, naked and coming out of the shower because Nate... And he, like, hands Nate a beer or something. Because Nate, like, comes to see Brenda and there's, like, this naked guy in her house.
Okay, yeah.
And there's no explanation, so it's like, does he think he's just, like, walked in on some other dude that's, like, just, you know, been with her?
Although then there was that Australian guy.
Yes. So, I mean, this is
And then there was the skateboarder. And then there was the erotic novella.
This is, like, a recurring issue.
And then there was the client. And there was the client. Wasn't there another guy at some point?
Probably was. Brenda does have a problem, clearly. But no, I just think, like, his, like... I think anyone who's been around people that are, you know, dealing with, like, mania or, like, kind of the, like, depressive side of, like, mental health struggles, Billy's energy is very authentic and recognizable.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's, like, well done within the show.
I do like how when the mania is ramping up, it's always... It it catches people by surprise because you mistake it for like a burst of like productivity or like inspiration.
Oh no, it starts out so great. Well, it's like with Claire.
He buys her the camera and they're going to move to Barcelona.
And she was worried because he was seeming depressed and like things were like a little bit, you know. So at first she's like excited. It's finally going well. It seems like
then he buys leather pants.
Well, that's when I think she should have known that things had gone wrong. But
it was in the same shopping trip, but I think she was just very excited about the camera.
I think she was so excited about the camera that she maybe didn't pay enough attention to the leather pants until it was too late.
She can use all her lenses with it.
She can. But I mean, that's a perfect example of how that kind of thing happens, though. And also how it's like, it's not always a bad thing. Like, part of what she liked about Billy was also related to part of what was wrong with him. But I think that can often be true for people. It's like, if something is a part of you, it's not all bad. Even if it can be related to something very, very troubling.
Yeah. What do you think about Lisa? Because we haven't really talked about Lisa very much. She's the main character, almost. Not really,
she never really gets to be a main character because we never really get to know her by herself.
I think if she hadn't been, killed or whatever.
Yes, maybe they would have followed her like they did Brenda. I don't know. We never get to find out.
Yeah.
But I mean, like with Brenda, like when here's where I think we don't follow her the same way though, because when Nate and Brenda break up, we still continue to follow Brenda when she's like living in that apartment and she has that relationship with the French horn guy. Between the time that Lisa sees Nate and Claire in Seattle and possibly gets pregnant, we don't see her again until she shows back up at, like, the Whole Foods or wherever it is that she runs into Nate again.
When she's being the personal chef for Catherine O'Hara.
I loved that storyline, though. That was so good.
When Nate keeps parking in the driveway.
And when she, like, needs her cake towel.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
No, and I really felt for Lisa in that situation, too, because, like, when she's, like, has, like, the baby and she's trying to make this job work, and, like, it's the job that, like, seemed so good, but now it's kind of turning into a nightmare, because, like, it seems great. It's, like, you'll have a place to live, you can bring your baby to work, you'll be able to, like, take care of your baby and breastfeed and, like, still have this, like, job within your, like, career field, but now it's, like, you're actually just, like, the personal servant to this, like, insane person who also is now resenting you for living in the space they told you could live in, and for having your baby at work, which they told you could do, which is why you took the job. But that seems like the kind of thing that's exactly how those things really turn out, you know?
Exactly.
So I really felt for Lisa in that situation. Like, I think that was good. But no, we don't really ever get to follow her on her own. So we never really see her side of the story as far as, what was the extent of the P.S. It's a trap pregnancy? Like, did she get pregnant on purpose to trap Nate? Maybe. Did she also, was
on
it...
purpose, I mean.
But, I mean, also, like, was it,
They had unprotected sex, I imagine, while he was in Seattle with Claire.
But that's also his fault.
Yeah, of course.
And then, I mean, also, what was the extent of her affair with Hoyt? We never get to find out because, I mean, we only...
Was the kid even Nate?
That's what I'm saying. We don't know what went on between the
Hoyt
time...
had a lot more opportunities to,
Well, I'm just saying,
happen.
we don't know what happened with Lisa between the time that we meet her in Seattle, that one time when Maya is conceived, and then after...
Another incestuous relationship. Because his sister was married to...
Oh, you're
Hoyt,
right, yeah. Yeah, no, that's very creepy. I hadn't even thought about that. I just mean, like, we don't know what's going on with Lisa between that time and then when she pops back up into the show. But I thought Lisa was a good character. I mean, I always felt so bad for her in the relationship with Nate, too, because, I mean, even though, like, it's not Nate's fault that he's not in love with Lisa. If he's going to decide to, like, commit to her and make a life with her, he should, like, try to be nicer to her.
Yes, but I think, again, after he has that thing with his brain, and, like, he, like, dies and comes back, I think he's, like, now I'm gonna, like, be a good person, and I'm gonna do a selfless thing by being with Lisa. And
but you should never do someone a favor by being in a
kid.
relationship with them. That's so gross.
Well,
he also could have still decided to commit to being a good parent to Maya without marrying Lisa if he knew he was never
But then they
gonna
went
be
in
able
the
to.
pyramid, and what did they decide?
They basically didn't decide. I think they went in the pyramid and they decided to stop pretending that they were like a fairy tale love story, but still try to have like a good marriage.
So what does that mean?
I don't think it means anything. That's why it's like it's not. They didn't really decide anything because
They seem so
different
relieved
things to
in
each
the
of them.
moment. I guess.
I think it means different things to each of them. To Nate, it means I don't have to pretend that I'm in love with you anymore. And but to Lisa, it more means we can admit that this isn't the fairy tale that we were hoping it was, but maybe we will fall in love somehow over time. So like I think she still has hope that it's like more happening than he does.
So their happy agreement is actually a total misunderstanding.
And also, I mean, their happy agreement is just to actually continue doing what they're doing. Because, like, I think they both feel that mentally they've clarified what's happening, but they're actually planning to continue living in exactly the same way they've been living. So it's really kind of a... It's you know what I mean? Like, their happy agreement is just that they finally have admitted to each other that it's not exactly what Lisa wants it to be. But they've also agreed that they're going to continue on in exactly the way that they've been going. So it's really, yeah, it's a nothing agreement.
Isn't Brenda there too?
Yes, awkwardly she comes into the pyramid, like, mid, like, the talk. And that's the other thing, too, though, is, like...
Brenda's kind of the elephant in the room of their whole relationship, too.
But I also think that the reason the show follows Brenda is that the show kind of wants us to know that Brenda and Nate are, like...
Supposed to be together.
Yes, like, if the show has some concept of destiny, I think Brenda and Nate are, like, caught in each other's orbit and they're never gonna, like, fully go somewhere else.
Even
like,
though Nate dumped her on his deathbed.
Yeah. And even though they're a terrible couple.
Yeah.
I also feel like, I mean, but the reason they're a terrible couple, I mean, they're both at fault. I mean, the first time that they're engaged, of course, Brenda starts writing her erotic novella and, like, you know, is with, like, the skater dude and all those other guys. So, that's obviously, like, Brenda is obviously to blame partially. But ultimately, Nate will never be happy with anyone because he always just is chasing the idea that, like, Nate wants to be with some person that's going to make him into who he wants to be.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he probably, like you said, married Lisa because he was like, now's my chance to be this selfless guy who, like, commits to Lisa. But notice how as soon as Brenda actually commits to Nate, he's no longer interested in her. Like, remember how much, like, passion and tension there was between Nate and Brenda when, like, Lisa had just died, but it seemed like it would be maybe inappropriate for them to get back together, but they still kept kind of seeing each other, and they both obviously wanted to just get together, and it seemed like, oh my gosh, these people can't stay apart, like they're magnetically drawn together. Remember that part? Yeah. And then flash forward, as soon as they get together, Brenda is basically just, like, taking care of Nate's child, and he's, like, resenting Brenda for, like, wanting to get pregnant, and basically, like, doing her a favor by, like, having, like, a kid with her. And he's, like, already, like, looking for, like, Maggie to be, like, his actual relationship that he was supposed to be in, and then he'll, like, leave Brenda and start a new life as a Quaker or something. Mm-hmm. And I assume as soon as he starts his new life as a Quaker with Maggie, he would have been, like, immediately bored and started trying to find somebody else. And hopefully Brenda wouldn't have been stupid enough to, like, go let him, like, back in after that. I mean, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. But what else haven't we talked about?
We haven't talked about Keith very much. I mean, we talked about how we found it kind of stunning that he wants to go into the funeral home business. We didn't really talk about how I've always kind of thought that Keith and David were, like, not a very good couple.
They had a lot of drama.
They had a lot of drama and not in, like, a good way. Like, no. I feel like they just don't seem to enjoy one another's company very often, like, during the course of the show. Like, there's this very tense vibe of, like, I wouldn't want to, like, be in their home.
They have that one moment where they reconnect. Remember when they're talking about all like the good times or whatever, and I'm like, man, I don't remember any of those good times that you're describing. I remember a lot of fighting and a lot of like tension and physical.
Yeah, like there was like the time. Yeah, there's like they had a lot of ups and downs, and I appreciate that they tried to work through their problems. And I guess the most optimistic thing we can say is that we imagine that they had worked through a lot of their problems and now are in a healthier place. But they did have that one time when they went on vacation to like that kind of crappy, like, I don't know, like it's like a resort, but it's just like a tiny hotel that you're like trapped in with like a swimming pool. What was that place even? Yeah,
I don't remember, but I know what you're talking about.
I remember they go on vacation and then they're like in their room, and remember they were like pounding on the wall, shouting like, we're gay in here. And like, and then they even like sang together. Mm-hmm. That was like one brief moment where I feel like they were like having so much fun.
Yeah.
But even on the ride home from that vacation, they immediately like started fighting again as like real life came like crashing down upon them.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's talk about Claire's. We already talked about how she ends up with like the incredibly like straight-laced, like surprising guy. But I mean, maybe he just seemed so good to her in comparison to the incredibly terrible guys that she was with before. I mean, because, like, okay, when we first meet her, remember Gabe?
Well, she's with Gabe when she finds out, isn't she, like, doing, like, crystal meth or whatever?
Yeah, she's, like, doing crystal meth at Gabe's behest when she finds out
that her father has died in the car crash at the beginning of the show. Like, so right from the beginning, you know, and, like, I think there is again, you're talking about the reoccurring themes, I think the show kind of finds it endlessly amusing to get the Fishers high in various scenarios where they shouldn't be high.
Yes. They also, I feel like over the course of the show, they use a lot of, like...
Mom takes ecstasy in the woods.
Well, I was going to say, they use some, like, pretty serious drugs over the course of the show.
Crystal meth, ecstasy, what else was there? There was more than that. There was ketamine or something. Somebody's in a K-hole at one point.
I think that there were some various, like, pills and other things that, like, I wasn't even sure exactly what they were.
Wasn't Gabe smoking crack also?
Yes.
Or no, and then there was the embalming fluid, too.
The thing where they dipped the joint in the embalming fluid and that one guy, like, collapsed at school or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was a lot of stuff that, like, but
Same move.
But remember when Claire steals the foot to, like, get back at Gabe?
I know,
that was so, like, inventive and exciting.
That was one of the more out-of-pocket things that Claire ever did, but yeah. I mean, justified, of course. I mean, he ruined her reputation at school.
But it was also related.
It was thematically correct. I see why you appreciate it.
I appreciated that it was like, that was a very like correct revenge. I'm shocked that she was able to get away with that. I mean, I know Keith helped like clean it up, but still.
Yeah. Well, Keith was supposed to help with David's arrest in Las Vegas too. So.
Yeah, it didn't totally. But he might have been mad at David at the time.
It's true. Maybe he didn't do as good a job with that one.
Just saying.
But yeah, we got Gabe. Then we got.
And then we have Russell, of course, which, I mean, just... Russell seemed fine until he wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could say that about a lot of people, but...
And then, of course, we have Billy.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
So what is there?
I guess those were her main relationships, I guess. And then we should definitely talk about Ruth's relationships, too, though. I mean, we've got...
Nikolai, and we got... what is Ed Bailey Jr.'s name?
He's the hairdresser.
The hairdresser. And then we got...
Hiram.
Hiram, yes, very good. And then, of course, we've got George Sibley.
But then don't forget about the weird relationship she has with Arthur before George.
Oh, yeah, we forget about Arthur. Yeah, that was an interesting turn for Rainn Wilson for...
Yeah, another guest star from The Office. Because we talked about the Jenna Fisher character.
Well, they have the same casting agent. What I've learned from reading books about movies and TV shows is anytime you see that happen, it's because
they have the
casting agent has the same cadre of people that they like to bring in for things.
But it's also like obviously a great casting agent.
Of course, clearly. But yeah, that was an interesting storyline because I felt like if things hadn't gone sideways with him and Ruth and being accused of being the person sending the excrement to George or them or whatever, he could have been, I feel like, a permanent character. He was living in their house.
Well, he could have been an interesting replacement for Rico too if Rico had like imploded. You know, like if Rico and Infinity had just like gone off the rails or whatever.
Exactly.
Like, I thought he would have been a perfectly interesting.
But because he nuzzled Ruth and then he was falsely accused.
But I feel like I also blame him kind of for Ruth's quick marriage to George, just because with him it's like the relationship flopped so badly. And he was sort of, like, age inappropriate for her. So then, of course, when someone that seems okay and is, like, appropriately, like, categoried for her comes along, she just,
if I was one of the
immediately,
kids and I was told that he was going to be my new stepfather, it's like, I don't think so.
Right.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, I think she just runs right into George's arms after that.
True.
And that ends up being kind of a huge mistake. Although, it comes around.
Why does it come around? Just because he sticks around for a long time?
Yeah, well, no, I just mean, like, okay, it seems like they've broken up and everything, but then by the end, it's like he's supporting her in her time of grief.
More like just she's probably just too tired to, like, go out and find anyone else. I mean...
Maybe, but I also kind of, more optimistically, I like to think that, he's gotten well. Hopefully he'll stay well. He is doing the right thing and trying to be there for her, even if it's for partially selfish reasons.
True.
She needs somebody.
Yeah.
And so it's good that there's somebody there, you know?
Dude.
And maybe they end up being an okay couple. Before he, like, went down into the bomb shelter, I think that she was liking being with him.
Bomb shelter? That poor woman, she definitely dodged a bullet there.
Right. But, like, who's your favorite character in that show?
Like you said, it's an ensemble. It's really hard to pick a favorite.
Not like, okay, not like you don't have to say this is the best character, but just who's the character that you're most fond of?
I don't know. Maybe Claire.
I like Claire a lot. She's really an asshole, but I do like her a lot.
I do like when she goes off on those poor people at the end that had to support our troops.
Even though that, like, they're like burying someone whose limbs were, like, literally all blown away. It's like, oh my gosh, Claire, like, stop talking.
I know. Like, I don't fully relate to her, but she never fails to amuse me, like, with, like, her terrible art and her terrible choices in men and her total self-involvement and, like...
Yeah,
like, no, you can't look away. She's very, like, engaging as a character, so... they're all engaging, though. It's hard to pick. I like her, like, fantasy of, like, what's that one where she's in, like, the sparkly dress or whatever?
Oh, when she's working in, like, the office and she, like, has the dance number about, like, the pantyhose, like, squeezing her.
Yes.
No, I like Claire a lot. I have a soft spot for David, though. Like, he has such a, like...
He's almost, like, too innocent for me or something. Like,
there's something about, like, an exuberant, like, boyishness about him that just, like, makes you kind of want to be like...
I can't even relate to that, like, kind of...
But I can't relate to David. I can relate to Claire much more than David. Mm-hmm. But I sort of have a soft spot for David because I feel like the show sees him kind of as he is. And he's really the, like... And David is not flawless. He does some crappy things. He, like... has unprotected sex with, like, the prostitute in Vegas, and he's not always, like, a great person. Like, he makes some, poor choices for himself and for others. But I think that he is really a good person at his core. Mm-hmm. Like, he's just a nice guy, like, in his core. And I don't really know if you could say that about any of the other characters.
Mm. Oh, one pairing we didn't talk about, I just remembered, was Ileana Douglas and Rico.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So that was interesting because she was hired to replace him, and then they, like, hook up at a, like, convention later on when he's, like, separated from Vanessa. Yeah,
I think it's, like, during the time when Vanessa has yet to let him back in after the Infinity incident, and then...
Which I don't think you can really call incestuous, but it's like another case of the show wrapping around itself again.
Yes, it coils back around because it is definitely
I feel like that's actually realistic. Don't you think that's like how it is? Like, it doesn't always seem like the same. Like, you think people are like temporary, but like somehow they like keep popping back up in your life just because they go. It's like there's only so many people who are in the same age bracket or economic status or like industry or like
exactly. I mean, like with Rico, it's like
community or like, you know, like the same people turn up.
How many other single funeral directors of like corresponding wanting to go with each other sexuality were even at that conference? You know what I mean? Like, first of all, I know that there's like a growing industry of female funeral directors, but still, I feel like there's still less than guys probably, and especially at that time. I think that she was kind of like a standout, and she happened to be like not unwilling to go with somebody at the conference. I mean, because I'm sure there were some other women there that like weren't looking to hook up. You know what I mean? And like how many guys there were like in that age bracket and like looking to like go with somebody. I mean, I feel like at those conferences generally, when we saw like Nate and David interacting with people, a lot of them were kind of older than them. Like, I kind of felt like they were the new generation, and like a lot of them were like more of like their dad's contemporaries and stuff. Like, you remember that when they go and they meet all those guys. It's like, so I definitely think like as far as like who was available to like hook up with at the conference, of course it would be them. You know,
definitely.
I am glad that was like a one-off though, and wasn't like a long-term thing. Cause that could
it was appropriate to like have it just be like a short-term thing.
And Ileana Douglas was a character that was like nice to see again, but I wouldn't want to see constantly for like the rest of the show. Like, she was very, very abrasive.
Oh yeah.
Like, even though I felt for her when they fired her, because they did kind of fire her wrongfully, I also understand why they needed to fire her, because they just did not want to have to like work with her.
Yeah. What else haven't we talked about?
I feel like there's so much to unpack. I mean, every character in the show has their own like relationship with the other characters. I mean, it's a lot. But kind of, I guess, overarchingly though, how do you feel like, as far as like, is there anything that like your view kind of shifted on due to like maybe either the time that we're in now versus when you originally saw the show, or who you are now, like at the point in your life that you're in versus when you originally saw it?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I mean, I definitely thought about death a lot during the course of watching this. That
is the one thing that's really hard about the show, is that it's like, even though I love the show, I'm going to need to like take a break from contemplating death so much. Like,
I definitely thought about like what I would want to have happen to my remains and stuff. So I want to be cremated, spread in the ocean, saying it now so somebody hears me. You can play this for people later if you need to. But, well, I mean, every episode begins with a death that we had to fast forward through a lot.
Yeah, we did skip most of those scenes this time, yeah. But, yeah, and that is, it's hard to kind of, that's like a lot. That makes the show harder to binge watch than some other shows.
Oh, yeah.
But it is, I think, one of the things that the people in the show deal with is that their relationship to death is so much closer than most people, so they have to think about it. Whereas I think a lot of us have found a way to distance ourselves from it so much.
I mean, like when David had fun filling out his preneed.
Yeah. But it's like, I can see where they're coming from on that. And yet, at the same time, I appreciate the fact that even though they're all so used to thinking about death in a certain arena, it doesn't devastate them any less when it happens to someone they love. And I think that that's true. I mean, in my experiences with thinking about what it'll be like when someone dies and then them actually dying, mentally preparing doesn't actually make it less upsetting.
No, not if you actually love them. I mean, it's going to be hard no matter how much you prepare for it.
But I think that that's very authentic, the way that it was like, even though they were so used to death, they still experienced it as a crisis.
Although, and I understand Nate's desire to want to be planted, but that was so terrible and awkward when Brenda had to like lift up the canvas bag with Maggie on the other side and like
and then you mean when like Keith and like has to like slug it over and then they're just like, we just like slump it into like the hole or whatever. I also felt like, you know what I realized too when I was, you know, the minute ago when you were talking about like what you want to have done with you, and then I was thinking, okay, so I've always kind of liked that idea of, like, being planted in the earth and going into a tree. Like, I always thought that would be kind of cool. But then I was thinking in the show, that burial ground does kind of become the place of nightmares. Because there are several scenes after that burial where you feel like a character is, like, in peril and kind of stranded and isolated and lonely, and it's like, why would you make your loved ones come all the way out here into the wilderness? Because, okay, at the end of when they bury Nate, remember Brenda's leaving, but, like, everybody else is already driven away, and then at first she can't, like, start her car, and it seems like she's gonna be, like, stranded, like, out in, like, the wilderness with, like, nobody, like, and that's so scary. And then later, a few episodes later, there's that scene with Claire where she goes to see Nate, and then she's, like, imagining talking to him, and then there's, like, a wild dog or, like, like, some kind of, like, a big, scary, like, animal, like, in the dark, like, coming for her, and it's, like, and he's, like, you gotta get out of here, and, like, I know that's supposed to also be about, like, mentally, like, her, like, you know, thinking, like, contemplating death and everything, but it's also, like, literally that kind of wilderness burial has become a very, like, it's a very scary place for, like, all the people. So that kind of made me, like, have a little pause and be like, you know what, like, that's a little, like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think the idea of a cemetery, too, is that it's, like, maybe more in a central location, and like,
you could safely visit the cemetery and
might
not
be,
be like
might be
eaten by wild dogs, hopefully.
nearby.
Yeah, but it's like, I definitely would not want to go to a cemetery. I mean, I guess my thought is, I don't want my family to be, like, burdened by, like, the arrangements they make for me. So I mean, in the universe where money is no object, you know, of course I'd like my ashes to be, like, blustered to, like, the most beautiful place in the world. Like, you know, I'd like to be, like, scattered in, like, the streets of Paris while we, like, eat chocolate croissants, and then, like, part of me can go, like, into the ocean beside, like, a lighthouse or something. Like, in, like, my fantasy where it's, like, but in reality it's, like, sure, if, like, hopefully by the time I die, all the people I'm leaving behind are in a great financial situation, it's, like, everything's going well, but, like, realistically, I really wouldn't want anything that adds, like, extra burden, either financially or emotionally, to the people that are left behind. And so, I mean, like, the whole thing where you have to purchase the plot, and then you have to put someone in a canvas bag and, like, dig the hole, like, even if that doesn't cost more, I feel like that might be emotionally more of a burden to the people you're leaving behind. Like, when there's the part where they're dragging you in the canvas bag, like we were talking about. Like, I don't necessarily want to force anyone to do that.
I mean, we don't have to go into great detail, but you know what's going on in Greece, right?
It's not good.
Yeah, running out of space. Yeah. And you don't even pay for a permanent burial, you just pay for, like, a certain number of years, and if you don't have enough money to, like, pay for another certain number of years, out you come. We got some other paying customers here.
It's really okay to greet baby and just bluster me into the wind, it's fine.
Well, actually, the reason is because the Greek Orthodox Church doesn't promote cremation.
It's tricky. Yeah, it's a tricky issue. I think there are a lot of people that don't want to be cremated for religious reasons. Because I mean, if you're from a resurrection standpoint, being cremated could, if you're believing that something's going to happen later for your body, you know, being cremated could be a mistake.
Sure.
So I mean, I see where people are coming from. It's just, like I said, my main goal, I guess, would be not to burden people unduly.
That would be a big burden. So.
But is there anything else that you wanted to talk about? I mean, I know we've been talking about this for a long time. It's just, it's such a good show. There's just, like, so much to think about.
Oh, yeah.
I was definitely happy that I enjoyed it so much to rewatch. Because, I mean, I think I said this before, but I've definitely had shows that I liked at one time and then they become, like, not as rewatchable later. Like, I'm just like, oh, I've kind of moved forward in my life. And even though I'm in a different point in my life now, like, back when I was originally watching the show, I was, like, Claire's age.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm, like, I think older than Nate is, or I'm older than he.
You're the same age.
I'm about the same age as he was
at the end of the show.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've really gone, you know, through, like, 2 different categories, but I still found the show very, very watchable.
Remember, he has, like, his 40th birthday or whatever.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm, like, not quite as old as him, but I'm more his contemporary.
Closer to him than Claire.
Yes, whereas originally I was closer to Claire than I was to Nate. Now I'm closer to Nate than to Claire, but I still think, even though my perspective has changed in that way, I found the show to still be, like, so rich and, like, there's just, like, so much happening.
Claire, I would cut my heart out and give it to you on a platter if it would change anything. Yes, it would. You'd be dead. You'd be dead. Oh, man, so many good scenes.
Right?
But, well, thank you for being on the Rob Burgess Show again.
Oh, you're welcome.
I hope you will find your way back here sometime.
I'm sure I will. I'm sure we'll meet again someday.
Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, RSS, and now Spotify. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com. If you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Also, if you want to call or text the show for any reason, the number is 317-674-3547. Until next time.